looking for answers is a human thing. Like, that's what we do as learners on the planet. And so opening doorways for kids to ask questions and learn and invite those conversations at home is what I believe a globally minded classroom does. It isn't indoctrination, it isn't propagandizing, it's opening doorway, windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, right? Let's open this up so we can see it in a way that we can learn from it and make sense of it. So global education is a drawing out of an innate curiosity and learning behavior that we all have as humans, and meeting it with, yeah, you can connect to that. What do you think?
Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. If there's one constant, one thread running through all the media that we are inundated with every time we open our phones or turn on television, it's that we live in an interconnected global world. Society is connected in every facet. We can look at big issues like the pandemic and climate change and global economies and see that these are not national questions. These are not national issues. They are global issues. And helping our students see that is vital if they're going to solve so many of these issues that we're facing that, frankly, some of us our generation created. And I thought it was the perfect time to bring on Julia Fliss.
My name is Julia Fliss. I am a 6th grade language arts teacher in Evergreen, Colorado. This is, I think I'm going on year 21, which is a little bit insane to think about. And I am not necessarily someone who keeps track in a really concrete way. So it's a powerful indicator of how strongly I believe in education, our kids, and what's going on inside our classrooms. That's me.
Julia is doing some really important and fantastic work at her school in Colorado. And in this conversation you're about to hear, we discussed the power and significance of learning additional languages. We talked about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and what a great framework they are for cultivating global education and global conversations at any school. And we talked about Julia's activism and her students' activism in their local community and the real importance of thinking globally and acting locally. All right, here's our conversation. Hope you enjoy. I thought we could start with the power of learning additional languages. I know you're somebody who speaks Spanish fluently. And, like a lot of Americans, I grew up not taking a language till high school, which right away sent a message that it wasn't very important. Took 4 years of high school Spanish, and so left with very little practical use of Spanish. And it wasn't until later in life I was put in a situation where I had to. And when I was in the Peace Corps, and you're kind of put in a situation where you have to learn the language, that I really understood not just how to learn a foreign language, that how high schools just do it all wrong, but that it is such an avenue into learning another culture. How has it shaped you as a teacher and a globally minded individual?
Wow. So I guess I'll start growing up. My mom actually was an English teacher in a former life, and we had conversations about what that meant to her. We'd sit down and I'd share something I'd written with her, and we just talk about what it means to really edit versus revise. So I grew up with writing process at the heart of my student experience. I loved learning from the inside out how words and ideas and ways of seeing the world could become my own personal form of self-expression. I love that I got to have my unique style, and it really probably formed my whole vision of what it means to be a language arts teacher, let alone my vision of language for itself. So when I was presented with the opportunity to take a language in high school, I didn't have that opportunity in grade school at all. I wish I had. I knew I wanted to get into some Spanish. Have always been drawn to it. So I took Spanish 1, Spanish 2, switched schools, and I met the teacher, like Senora Cavari is her name, and she's amazing still. She opened the door to the understanding of culture and how it actually comes through language. I learned and got to experience the rhythm of Spanish as a Romance language, as an doorway into an understanding of a whole different way of life. We took a trip to Spain. I remember saving up for this trip, and it was like I needed to do this trip. I knew it. And we experienced, that was my first experience in a foreign country. It was my first experience with travel. And because she was the teacher she helped us learn the language through the culture. So we sat down and we had big meals, and we tucked into little neighborhoods, and we adventure traveled, and we adventure learned Spanish. So much so that I just stuck with it. When I went to college, I was actually pre-med, and I forever kept my love of language. I started looking at everything as a language. So math was a different language to me. Pre-med, chemistry, biology, everything just was a different language to learn, to help me see the world differently. It was all a different lens through which I could look to really understand the power of whatever that content was. And I kept up my Spanish. I just, at the college level, started digging in. I met a couple of friends one of whom lived in Mexico City. So I went to Mexico City with her, and we explored. And then my junior year, I decided I need to go study abroad. So I went to San Sebastian, Spain. I went to La Universidad del País Vasco. So I went to Basque Country, which is super, super rich, because there's also the Basque language, and there was revolution, people were shooting rubber bullets at each other in the streets. It was this whole other experience that really asked me to critically think about the power of language, and the power of a language being forced on a group of people, or the power of a culture that felt like it was being erased from another culture, because Basque Country history is all about maintaining its integrity and its identity between France and Spain. So I went to the university there, and it was great. I loved it. It was awesome to get, my Spanish was at a level where I could hang with and take courses with locals. So I was taking courses in art history in Spanish, and able to go to Figueres, Spain, and see Salvador Dali's house. And I was able to do my in-depth study of Guernica by Picasso. And I hung out with that painting at the Prado in Madrid for a few days while I wrote it. But more, I found myself learning by just traveling. So I put my backpack on. I have that picture, actually, my kids look at it. I put my backpack on, and I just took off, and I learned hands-on, experiential learning. I learned about the culture of Spain and the culture of a language. And so I started to think about, now, why did people in south of Spain not say the S? What's going on here? And how does that relate to the United States? And why do we do things like this? And what's the nature and nurture part of how we absorb what we absorb and where we go with that? And it opened doors. Seriously opened a door when I actually got bitten by a black widow and had a near-death experience, which changed my whole trajectory in education. I went from head down pre-med in books to head up, no longer pre-med. What am I doing to help our global community? How can I do this? I want I want to catch people before they end up in the ER. Like, this is about mindset. This isn't about fixing people after. This is about like, how can we see the world differently so we don't create trauma drama. I came back to Iowa. I decided to do an honors thesis. I hung out a couple extra trimesters and audited a couple like Don Quixote courses in Spanish. And then I packed my Volkswagen and drove west, arrived in Denver and started at a women's and children's shelter along with a restaurant. Needed my Spanish. I had also sourced some counseling opportunities when I at the University of Iowa. So I became so enamored with the community that is created when you take a step outside of the rigid confines of a language and you look at it as a means of expressing culture, that I just sourced that for my next steps. And I ended up as a para in a school for pregnant and teenage families. And then I ended up in my first classroom at Denver West High School in Denver, teaching kids who were predominantly Spanish speakers coming from Mexico. I taught transition ELA, so kids who were just learning English, but really felt most comfortable in Spanish, how to function, how to survive, how to be in the place that we were using the language that they had. So it very much became about, what do you want to learn about? What do you need to learn in order to make your way through your day, be your best self, have a conversation with someone if you don't understand something, talk to your parents about what they can do to help themselves in this situation. So it was a very inside out way for me to learn teaching. So to bring that all back around, I didn't go to teacher school, quotes. I learned from the inside out from my kids how to be the facilitator in a classroom to help kids teach themselves what they needed. I got my alternative license those first 2 years, so I have teaching credentials, bilingual education, and a bunch of others, but language is truly what brought me into a classroom and opened my path, my career, although I would say it's just who I am, opened my potential as a teacher.
And I'm sure all the life experiences that you've had, not taking a traditional route into education, makes you a very unique and valuable teacher as well. And I really appreciate the points you made about being in Basque Country, and understanding finer points of Spanish culture because you understood the language and thought about the language. My wife and I were the Peace Corps in former Yugoslavia, and we saw that on display all the time, where the region essentially speaks the same language, but they've parsed it out into the finer, subtle details that have arisen due to boundaries that are drawn, and you can understand a lot of the conflict there by looking at the language. And I think that you can go your whole life living near other people and not really understanding them if you don't understand their language. I mean, Southern California, where I am, is a great example of this. And I wonder how just being a fluent Spanish speaker has helped you understand the families and students you've worked with in a way that you wouldn't have understood them if the communication had only been in English.
In and at West High School, my students who were high school age, like I said, were learning English in order to make their way through the world. They were also learning English so that they had the opportunity that their parents really committed to make sure that they got. Some of them arrived in this country, quote, not through legal means. Some of them arrived, they did whatever it took to get here, to get the opportunity they wanted and needed. And so because I spoke Spanish, we could have conversations in classrooms or in the community or at a local grocery store where I could help them source their own identity and make those connections between, oh, our culture does it like this. I know your culture does it like that. And it doesn't mean that. It could mean this. There are just little intricacies that became talking points, like open talking points about, okay, so here parents actually parent like this. It may not look like that, but this is how our culture, the norms of our culture, the values of our culture, not necessarily compare to yours, but how you might be able to understand more about our culture if you could understand this value or this norm. So it became kind of a conversation around like society and how we function as a big picture. It also, because this was right around 2000, the year 2000, that's crazy to say, and the census came out, there were conversations around English only. There were conversations around filling out the census and my kids not wanting to mark the Hispanic box because to them, Hispanic meant from Spain. And as a revolutionary, like as a deep-seated like Che Guevara, like I'm from this revolutionary part of Mexico and I want my identity as Azteca, like I want that to be a part of me. We had great conversation in English and Spanish around what does that say? Like if you're given this title, does that mean that your identity is that? Like how could we help our government understand that that part of our identity is so important to us? Like where can we go with this? So we dug into that. Columbine happened the year after and schools got locked down and, there were all of these stereotypes coming out about like the trench coat mafia and only this type of people, these groups of people in inner cities actually like shoot each other up in schools. And so my kids were like, what? Are you saying that every inner city kid is in a gang and that every inner city kid is a member? Like we had these great, because we did. I mean, I had at least 5 kids die as a result of gang violence when I taught at West High School. And it was part of our reality, but to have a bigger group of people stereotype us, like who we are based on that, just felt wrong and it felt like a violation. And so to have conversations about like critical conversations about how we fit in society in the context of world events and how we could move through that anger and resentment and all of that emotion to a place where we could take action and make some change and actually like suggest different ways of thinking about that was incredible. It was an incredible opportunity to open conversations that I believe we need to have with our kids. Like we get to teach kids not just how to have those conversations with each other and the world, but the most important conversation is the conversation you're helping that kid have with himself or herself or themselves, right? Because we just learn, we absorb all of like this consumption of who knows what from the media, and it gets all jumbled inside. And if we don't help kids see that there are filters and lenses through which, and biases through which people are sharing their experience, it's a shared experience, then we're not doing our jobs. Like we're doing kids a disservice, I believe.
Yeah, I heard you say recently that in the classroom, we go there, is how you put it. We go there. So want to unpack that a bit for me?
Yeah, perfect segue into my day today. So it's Friday where I am right now, and we start school next week. So we're still in our like teacher PD week. Today, our district requires some EDU, so Jeffco EDU, and we get to choose which professional development courses we engage with. Some of them are virtual, some of them are in person. So when I walked in today, I had come from a meeting about proficiency scales. Proficiency scales are something new my district is doing. It's all about kind of a learning progression and challenging the traditional idea of grades and points. Woohoo! So I was super fired up about that. And I came to my EDU course that I had chosen, and I looked close and like, this is for social studies teachers. And I'm like, I'm going anyway. So I get on and it's phenomenal. It is literally, I can read the course title. It is, let me make sure I'm saying it perfectly. Of course. It's equity-focused instruction in civically minded classrooms. And I get there and I recognize a few faces. I am excited because it starts off with how can we have critical conversations in our classrooms and know that our district supports us? And I'm like, yes, my district is being proactive. There are resources and they are citing like places that I look to for guidance from Facing History in Ourselves. I literally have like the first book ever. This was introduced to me like 20 years ago, so I continue to source it. They're citing Learning for Justice. They're citing like identity maps, all of this work that we weave into my language arts classroom, because again, in my classroom, in our classroom, it's language arts. It's the art of learning to express yourself in the world, and you get to do it your way. It doesn't have an English only overlayer on it, overstory on it. It has a, this is me, what's my story, how do I want to experience, how do I have that conversation with myself so I can talk about hard things or scary things or just global issues in a way that helps me make sense of the world with someone else, with myself, with my family at home, and each other. So if I unpack that maybe in a sentence or a more streamlined thought, if something happens in one of our worlds and the world as a whole, we're going to talk about it in our classroom. It's not necessarily, that doesn't mean that I'm going to bring something up, but once the kids learn that whatever's in their invisible backpack when they walk through my door, our door, has permission to be here, like not just has permission, actually, like we create space for that here. We get to use language to help make sense of what's going on in our lives. And we can help each other make sense of that using the art of language.
A couple of times now you've brought up the term identity, which is such an important and powerful term to unpack and examine with students. And right now in this country, there's a lot of ongoing debate about the American identity, what it means to be American, and how that identity is reflected in education. What does it mean to teach about America in our schools? But we also know that the world is incredibly interconnected. And so there's also a layer on top of that of what is our global identity. And I'm curious what global education means to you. Why is it important that your students in Colorado are globally minded?
So global education to me, I guess if you look at the Latin root of education, it can either be the really industrial, traditional, fill the vessel, like throw the content at the kids, or it can be to bring forth, nurture self-expression. And especially now on the planet, I believe it is vital to teach our kids how to have that conversation, how to have the conversation using their language with themselves, right? And what are the traits of that language that you are using with yourself? What is your self-talk like? Do you have self-talk? Does that exist? What does the language look like at home? What conversations are you having at home? What do you think when you watch TV? If you're watching YouTube, how much of that, how does that influence you? And so as we experience a world that is more and more compartmentalized in windows through technology, how can we help kids develop a critical mindset to really understand and make sense of, and then form an opinion around, absorb, not absorb, what's happening? So if I'm a kid in the world right now, if I'm a kid in Evergreen, Colorado, right? I see smoke. We are just inundated with smoke from California and Oregon. And hopefully kids are having conversations around that. Hopefully kids and parents and in communities are having conversations around that. Maybe even they're like tapping into some prior knowledge. We had a fire here last year. Like I was on the next round of evacuations, and quite a few of my kids did get evacuated. So if you're making connections there and you know that this has actually touched our community, and you see the heat up on the planet, and you make connections about how that if you connect the dots to what else is happening in the world, asking those questions and looking for answers is a human thing. Like that's what we do as learners on the planet. And so opening doorways for kids to ask questions and learn and invite those conversations at home is what I believe a globally minded classroom does. It isn't indoctrination, it isn't propagandizing, it's opening doorway, windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, right? Let's open this up so we can see it in a way that we can learn from it and make sense of it. So global education is a drawing out of an innate curiosity and learning behavior that we all have as humans and meeting it with, yeah, you can connect to that. What do you think? Yeah, it does actually make sense that that would equal that would equal that. And that's how you bring it home to you. Yeah, how are you going to talk to your parents about that if they believe like that?
Yeah, it's natural for us to want to make those connections. And it's actually school that tells us that we shouldn't. School compartmentalizes everything. And then you get to the point where students are surprised that there's overlap between classes when it happens. And good segue to the Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN introduced, I think, in 2015. I wonder how you've used those, your thoughts on the SDGs and how they maybe fit into some of the work that you do.
We use them as a conversation map and launch point. So in sixth grade, we dig into hero's journey, personal narrative, let's make sense of the world. We expand it to, if we're talking about a plot diagram in a book, we'll bring it real life. Level 4, what's the story of America? If you had to design a plot diagram of where we are now, what does it look like? We read books that are connected to issues, challenges, problems that people are facing in the world. And the Sustainable Development Goals help us to make those connections. So right now, we're all sitting in school, and last year we weren't. We didn't have access to education in a way that makes us, we felt our best. Now, and we really did some work last year, so I'm not saying that we didn't learn. I'm just saying right now, as in the United States, we come back in person in classrooms and we get to do education the way that we love to do it. Granted, a whole bunch of things need to be turned on its head. That's quality education. Like, this is what we know we need for education. Each of my kids knows what they need for education, and we expand that. But if we look out into the world and we look at other kids' experiences in classrooms all over the world, we see that the problems or challenges that other kids in other countries are facing with regard to education are so much different. Like, what other kids are facing is not something that even enters one of my kids' mindsets until we start to look at it. And so in that way, the SDGs are a conversation map. They're a launch point to a global conversation around how can we create connection, have conversations, open up the idea of sustainable development in the world as an individual, as a global citizen, as a community member, and then take action on behalf of what we need and what the planet needs and what, as learners, what we need on the planet.
Yeah, there's 17 goals, and each one provides a unique entry point into a lot of what you're describing, global conversations in local context. I spent a lot of time with number 12, which is responsible consumption and production. I live in a part of the country, even by the standards of America, which is pretty consumerist, and so we get to have some pretty rich conversations about the things we consume, where they come from, the sourcing of materials, and yeah, like you said, it's a really powerful way of drawing global issues right into the local community. And the old adage about think globally, act locally, which maybe to a lot of people just sounds like an old bumper sticker they saw. But I think it's a really powerful notion. I sometimes get a little puzzled by service learning that seems overly globally focused. You can raise money for an organization, just an example that I've seen around here. You could raise money for an organization that is helping people dig wells in Kenya. And that's not a bad thing, but there are people right here in the United States that don't have access to running water. And I wonder about this notion, what it means to you about thinking globally, like we've been talking about, but getting your students and yourself to act in a local way that has connections to those issues.
Yeah, we call those our personalized action projects. Definitely, let's see, influenced highly by Steve Stasek. Do you know of Inspire Citizens? I did some work with him. Yeah, so throughout the year, we do kind of guided inquiry. So here's a novel we're going to read. Let's talk personal narrative. Let's analyze characters. Let's get our language arts standards. Let's get even our social justice standards in there, right? Because we're talking about identity and characters, right? And then let's also open this up in a way that, okay, now what are you interested in? What's your curiosity? What's your passion? Which of these goals would you love to read a book about? And so we break out into small personalized action campaign groups that choose a book, they choose some kind of form of expression to bring in. So they're all doing a study together, like an inquiry together around literature of some kind. And then we talk about how, if we were a character in that book, what would we do? And we talk about what if that book were out in our world, how would you see it? And then we bring in, what do you see in our community that we need to change? What in our school do you recognize now that maybe you didn't recognize before because of your passion? We do research. We do all kinds of digging into root causes. We do all of the kind of deep dive work to help kids really get into what is my goal and how can I target a specific issue. And then we sit with it. We really just, okay, so this is what this looks like here. And we don't want to glamorize it. We don't want to, like you said, raise money for an organization in Africa because, ooh, it's Africa. And I know there are places that on the planet definitely need that sourcing. But we, as global citizens in a classroom in Evergreen Middle School, make change with every choice we make. So what are the choices you can make every single day? And what choices do you think you could make that might impact others in our community just to see things differently? From last year, we had a student whose whole campaign was around prohibiting cars from idling outside the front of our school because parents drop their kids off and then parents wait to come pick them up. And if the cars just idle, that affects the environment. And so if we just ask parents to, hey, can you just turn the ignition off? That's one step, that's one choice that you could make, that you recognized could make an impact on this community. We had kids a couple of years ago look at the styrofoam trays we had in the cafeteria and say, oh, no, we don't. And they changed it. And so now we have sustainable trays. We have a whole bunch of kids right now on just really, it's kind of a crusade actually to make healthier choices for our lunches because they're just the nutritional value. Like I could pull in a student who would just, she'd knock your socks off because she's so on it. But what impacts you in a way that not only ignites your passion, like who you are on the planet, but also is something you care about so deeply that you are wanting to share with the world. You want your action campaign others to learn from. So that's how we do it in here. We just look around. I can give you another example. We have Evergreen is about 98% white. We don't have a lot of diversity here. And 3 years ago, in May, there was a college professor who walked by a statue called the African Queen. She's a metal sculpture kind of in one of the shopping areas in part of our town, and saw that someone had tied a noose around its neck. She happened to be with one of her students who was Black. They talked with each other. They got mad, got angry, tried to get more information, contacted a local newspaper. And when the article came out and people were confronted, there was a whole bunch of sweeping that under the rug. There was even some blame placed on the middle school where I teach, like, oh, it just must be middle schoolers. And in that moment, that became my personalized action campaign. We started the Evergreen Coalition for Racial Justice as educators and parents in our community. We started educating ourselves, pulling in resources and guest speakers and people who could help us learn how to combat and how to make sense of and how to create space to do the work we needed to do to dismantle the racism in our community.
So I love the amount of self-reflection in everything that you say. And I think society has done a pretty poor job of internalizing this kind of reflection. I think a lot of it, going back to the example about water, access to clean water. I really do think that a driving force behind not wanting to do a clean water project around, say, Native American reservation is just simply, it requires someone to admit our country's shortcomings, right? You're having to look your country in the mirror. And you talked about the resistance, the sweeping under the rug. It is spot on, and it reflects everything I see here as well. How has the community responded to your initiatives, your students' initiatives? How do your families respond? What is generally the vibe around school and the community when Julia Fliss gets her kids thinking hard about global and local issues?
I feel like it's embraced. I do have a couple of parents who push back, or have had a couple of parents who pushed back, and I open that up as an opportunity for conversation and critical discourse, civil discourse. I mean, it's a way to invite the community into a learning process and acknowledge that maybe we're not all going to agree, but predominantly, because our entire goal, like our focus, is critical conversations in a classroom about what we want to learn about. My kids, our kids, want to have those conversations with their parents. They want tools to help them talk with someone, even a friend who's just said something and they're like, did you know that when you say that it means this? And they'll pull out their Learning for Justice toolkit. They'll pull out their, interrupt, they'll go through the whole process. And so it becomes hey, I'm coming from this place, not because I want you to believe what I believe. I'm coming from this place because I believe in the power of conversation to change the world. I believe in the power of opposing viewpoints. I believe in learning through contrast. I believe in how we can take two opposite ideas and still find space for teaching at the intersection. And when you help kids learn those tools and then you invite parents to see that with transparency, especially last year, because parents are watching Zooms, right? There's a powerful moment. We dug deep into The Hill We Climb with Amanda Gorman. We talked about the fig tree, and there is so much rich discussion that I believe is a source everyone can look to for guidance, for support, for the way forward.
So we're recording this in mid-August. As you said, you are just about to go back to school. What are you anticipating the first week's going to look like? And I wonder, how have you thought about how the student experience in the last year plus, how that can be incorporated into what we do this year? I think we're sitting here with a golden opportunity in education to tap into what students have gone through and are continuing to go through. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that and kind of how you're feeling about the first couple weeks back.
I'm probably going to talk really fast because I am very passionate and super excited about this. So I'll try to slow myself down. Um, wow. So I could start anywhere from like learning loss narrative to culture of belonging. And I'm going to just jump into culture of belonging. I think the thing that we really lost is connection. And I think that we have to reconnect. We have to invite kids in to reframe their experience of school, to reinvent themselves as learners in our schools, to really like rebirth themselves and ourselves as a community of learners in a classroom. I am all about community building. So cultivating, like I said, that culture of belonging is top of my list, even more so this year. Did the same last year, definitely focused a lot on like critical well-being last year and like radical self-care and how that comes in. This year we'll kind of, I feel like, unpack that a little bit, like just look at it right in the face and say, okay, we had to do this last year. Do you remember that? Like just kind of bring it up a little, like this is what we're carrying with us right now. And that's a past experience of school. And so now we get to recreate this one. We get to bring in community. We have at Evergreen Middle, again, my leadership is phenomenal. We've devised our whole week around that. So our kids come in the first day, sixth graders alone come in on Wednesday, and we have a whole like community building activity. It is a very alternative first day. It is not go sit in every class and look forward and watch a PowerPoint or anything like that. It is, let's build some community. Let's make some connections. Let's really feel the energy of getting to be together again as a community. They come back on Thursday with the whole school, same thing. Like, how can we connect? How can we create and launch a school year that is targeting belonging? How can we do that, right? We have activity after activity after activity planned for that, including just like murals in the hallway. Who are you as a learner? We have a team jersey this year. There's just a lot we're doing to really put community first. And then in my classroom in particular, always do the same thing. We co-create our vision. We own the learning space. We create brave space. We talk about what we want a language arts classroom to look like. Like, what do you want to have happen in here? If you could do anything, if you wanted anything to show up here, what would you have show up here? And we kind of envision our year together. From there, our sixth graders go to an experiential, like outdoor learning opportunity. They go to outdoor lab. And so for a week, our sixth graders, we just get out and we do team building and we do fly fishing and we go on geo hikes. And I get to teach the Leave No Trace sustainability course. And we talk about what is stewardship and how can we take care of each other, and like our classroom, our community as an ecosystem. Like, just like our global ecosystem right now is struggling because we've imbalanced it. We've thrown it off. We have created chaos. So too are we an ecosystem in a classroom that gets to take care of each other and notice when things are off a little bit, or help each other out when we know that we might need it. So we create that bond and that community first. And that's when the learning happens. That's when that like collective effervescence, and you get those conversations. And when I say to somebody, hey, would you be willing to share? Give them an opportunity or an opening. Most times, like, yeah, I can share a little bit. You know, I'm going to show up as me. It's okay for me to show up as me here. You're going to see me as me. And it's powerful.
That outdoor ed program sounds like an amazing way to start the year. I mean, starting the year with non-academic team building, community building, stewardship is really important. But it sounds like you have a really excellent program there, and I love how student-centered it is. You know, the students are as much a part of the community building as the teachers are. I love asking guests for advice. For someone listening interested in globally minded education, maybe in the sustainable development goals, in doing some of the things that you're doing, where do you suggest starting?
Um, Asking questions. I really believe in questioning everything. Reach out, make some connections. I personally love Twitter. I source a lot of inspiration and resource finding there. Um, Email me or just reach out, DM. Um, you could look up. There's so many places. If you're a people person, connect with people. If you're a resource person, check out Teach SDGs. Check out the UN website. Holy cow, there's so much. Check out definitely Human Res Pro, like Human Restoration Project. Just let your curiosity guide you. Get in touch with your inner kid that just allows yourself to question and seek answers and integrate that into your life experience.
You talked about working from within the system to make change. So how about teachers that feel like, they're within the system and they're feeling constrained? They want to work within the system. What advice would you give them about starting to push the boundaries a bit if they're feeling like they're not going to have the support they need?
Yeah, so all of this fits right into my standards. I literally give my kids our 6th grade language arts standards. We take expo markers and we like mark them up. We graffiti wall them. We do all kinds. There are connections everywhere. So really it's about using your standards as an access point to source the supplemental, the deeper, I'm trying not to be judgmental, to source depth, to source individual, to source passion, to source like that deeper work that is, for me, transformative pedagogy. It's just like, it's who I am. It's how we get to experience education. So if you're looking to help kids learn more, grow more, be more fully themselves, give yourself permission to dig into your standards and find it, because it's there. It's in every single standard and every single target. You just have to look for it.
Before we get out of here, I want to ask about your work with Girl Rising. I want to talk a bit about that. I'm not actually familiar with the work you've done. I know that you have a connection there. I absolutely love that film, and I'm interested to hear about what you've done there.
Yeah, so I started using Girl Rising, I think 5 years ago. My principal actually introduced it to me. He was the first person in our school district. So my principal is a former high school language arts teacher, and he was the first person in our district to debut the film in its entirety. And so when we started digging into it together and saw the connections to identity and to education as a doorway into a transformed life, we just, the possibilities exploded. If you're not familiar with Girl Rising, definitely look that up. It is a nonprofit organization that is all about the fact that one girl with courage can change the world. So when we educate girls, we, in essence, change that entire ecosystem balance on the planet. And they follow the story of 9 different girls from all over the world who've experienced obstacles, challenges, just cultural rules, laws, mores that have held them back from getting to be or even think that they could be their best selves. And so through storytelling, there's access to identity work, there's access to cell work, there's access to diversity, equity, inclusion work, there's access to using the power of story and each of our stories in order to change the world. They now have partnered with Flipgrid to do like actual educator lessons. They have online lesson planning. Last year I used their Teen Rising module, and my kids loved it. I happened to have a kid who was traveling in Nepal, and she saw the video of the girl in Nepal, and her mom was like, "Can you please Zoom with me, because this was one of the most powerful things we've ever experienced," because she got to do that as they were traveling. But Girl Rising is a doorway into how storytelling and activism makes an impact on our planet, and how our stories truly do unite us. My work with them, though, I just am a believer in them. I am a huge advocate. When we experienced in our classroom that next level element of the teens rising, and now they even have a climate justice component. It's awesome. It's called Future Rising. I just couldn't get enough, and my kids were so interested. I couldn't get them resources fast enough. So I'm a huge proponent. I'm a believer in global activism, and they're doing some amazing work.
And I think that's a great point to end on, that you find that resource, that powerful window, that way into global issues and global discussions. And like you say, it goes in all different directions. You can take it all different ways. Love that. Julia Fliss, educator, activist, anti-racist, world-wise learner. She, her, we. Julia Fliss, thank you so much for taking the time today to join me.
Yeah, thank you. Gift is mine. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Julia Fliss and found her insights and ideas as inspiring as I do. She's on Twitter at Julia Fliss. Very good person to follow. And just to follow up, I can't stress enough how powerful a teaching tool the UN's Sustainable Development Goals are. They're just 17 beautiful windows into global issues for any subject. Any teacher can use them. So, of course, you can Google the UN Sustainable Development Goals to learn more about them. There's also a site called teachsdgs.org, where there's lots of resources for teachers connected directly to the Sustainable Development Goals. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And I hope you're able to take something away from this episode, something you could take to your classroom, some of Julia's ideas and thoughts that you can apply and help your students become more globally minded. Thanks for checking out What's the Big Idea? See you next time.